The sky had already turned dark when Tanya Robinson checked her watch. Nearly midnight. She'd been sitting in her car for almost 3 hours, watching the back entrance of the Pinewood County Administration Building. Her hand cramped from taking notes about who came and went at this unusual hour. This was her 4th night of surveillance, and the pattern was becoming clear. Something wasn't right in this small town. Tanya adjusted the collar of her plain black jacket and stretched her neck. 6 months undercover was taking its toll. She'd rented a small apartment in town, built a cover story as a freelance consultant, and slowly worked her way into local circles. But tonight might have given her the breakthrough she needed. Photographic evidence of sealed envelopes changing hands between the deputy mayor and 3 business owners who'd recently won suspiciously large government contracts. Control. This is Blackbird, she whispered into her secure phone. I've got the shots, 3 separate meetings, same pattern as before. Sending encrypted files now. The voice on the other end was all business. Good work, Blackbird. Head back and we'll review in the morning. Tanya started her modest sedan, nothing flashy that would draw attention, and pulled away from her observation point. The FBI had sent her to investigate corruption allegations in Pinewood County after 3 whistleblowers had come forward, then mysteriously withdrawn their statements. One had left town entirely. The case had federal jurisdiction because the contracts involved federal highway funds. She took the long way back to her hotel, making sure she wasn't followed. Standard procedure. The streets were nearly empty this time of night. Pinewood wasn't a big place, just under 30,000 people, a main street that had seen better days, and new developments sprouting up along the edges. The kind of town most people drove through without stopping. At the intersection of Maple and Pine, she noticed headlights behind her. Nothing unusual, but her training kicked in. She took an unexpected right turn. The car followed. She made another turn. Still, there could be nothing, she thought, but reached for her phone just in case. Before she could dial, flashing lights erupted behind her. Not just 1 patrol car, but 2, their sirens wailing briefly before cutting off. Tanya pulled over immediately, her mind racing through protocols. This was an unexpected complication. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel as 2 officers approached, 1 on each side of her car. Their flashlights beamed directly into her eyes, making it hard to see their faces. License and registration, the officer on the driver's side demanded without preamble. No introduction, no explanation for the stop. May I ask why I'm being pulled? Over, officer, Tanya asked calmly. License and registration first, he repeated, his tone harder. Tanya noticed his hand resting on his holster. My registration is in the glove compartment and my license is in my purse on the passenger seat. I'm going to reach for them slowly, okay? The officer on the passenger side spoke up. Step out of the vehicle first. This wasn't standard procedure for a routine traffic stop. Something was off. Tanya weighed her options, revealing her identity, as an FBI agent might compromise months of undercover work. But refusing reasonable commands would escalate the situation unnecessarily. Of course, officer. She unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly opened the door. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped onto the asphalt. The officer directed her to the rear of her car, where the headlights from the patrol vehicles illuminated her clearly. Now, she could see them better. 2 white officers, both in their 30s, wearing the dark blue uniforms of the Pinewood Police Department. Put your hands on the trunk, the first officer instructed. Tanya complied, keeping her face neutral despite her growing concern. The second officer began questioning her. What are you doing out so late? His tone suggested her presence alone was suspicious. I'm heading back to my hotel. I'm in town for work, she answered truthfully. What kind of work has you out at midnight? I'm a consultant. I was meeting with a client who could only see me after hours. The first officer circled her car, shining his flashlight through the windows. And who might that client be? Tanya kept her story vague but believable. I work with small businesses on their growth strategies. Client confidentiality prevents me from sharing details. Convenient, the officer remarked, his disbelief evident. You match the description of someone we're looking for in connection with a reported disturbance. This was the first mention of why they'd stopped her. What disturbance? I've been working all evening. We got a call about a suspicious person taking pictures around government buildings. The officer's eyes narrowed. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Tanya's pulse quickened slightly. Had she been spotted during her surveillance? She maintained her composure. No, sir. As I said, I was with a client. The first officer returned to her side. Mind if we take a look in your car? Actually, I do mind. Do you have probable cause for a search? Tanya knew her rights and, more importantly, knew how a typical civilian would respond. The officers exchanged glances. Ma'am, refusal to cooperate only makes you look more suspicious. I'm not refusing to cooperate. I've answered your questions, truthfully, but I don't consent to a search without cause. Tanya kept her voice respectful but firm. The first officer stepped closer, invading her personal space. Listen, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Small town like this, we know when something doesn't fit. And you, ma'am, don't fit. The implication hung in the air between them. Tanya was one of the few black professionals who'd stayed at the town's main hotel in recent months. She'd noticed the sideways glances since arriving, but she hadn't expected such blatant targeting from law enforcement. Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I'm simply exercising my constitutional rights. If you're not detaining me for a specific violation, I'd like to continue to my hotel. Oh, I think we have reason to detain you. The officer pointed to her back tire. That tire looks dangerously worn, and I believe I smell alcohol on your breath. Tanya hadn't had a drop to drink, and her tires were nearly new. This was fabrication, pure and simple. The situation was escalating in a disturbing direction. I haven't been drinking, officer. You're welcome to perform a breathalyzer test if you have one. Step away from the vehicle, the second officer ordered, suddenly. We're going to conduct a search based on reasonable suspicion. Before she could protest further, the first officer took her by the arm and moved her toward the patrol car while his partner began searching her vehicle without consent. Tanya considered her options. Revealing her identity now would blow her cover and months of careful investigation. But remaining silent might lead to her arrest on trumped-up charges. From the corner of her eye, she saw the second officer emerge from her car holding a small plastic bag. Even in the dim light, she could tell it wasn't hers. Well, what do we have here? He held up the bag with a satisfied smirk. That's not mine, Tanya stated firmly, knowing how ineffective those words typically sounded. That's what they all say. The first officer tightened his grip on her arm. Turn around. You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. As the cold metal of handcuffs closed around her wrists, Tanya made a split-second decision. She would maintain her cover. This unexpected turn might actually lead her deeper into the corruption she'd been sent to uncover. Someone had noticed her surveillance and reported her. These officers had been sent to intimidate her, or worse, to frame her. This wasn't random harassment, it was connected to her case. You're making a mistake, she said as they led her to the patrol car. No, ma'am, the officer replied, pushing her head down as he guided her into the back seat. Looks like you're the one who made the mistake. Pinewood isn't for everyone. As the door slammed shut, Tanya took a deep breath. This was far from over. The officers didn't know who they were dealing with, and soon enough, neither would the corrupt officials who'd sent them. She just needed to be patient and observant. Every word, every action would become evidence. The patrol car pulled away from the curb, carrying her toward the station and the next chapter in an investigation that had just become far more personal than anyone had anticipated. The ride to the Pinewood County Police Station took less than 10 minutes, but to Tanya, it felt much longer. She sat perfectly still in the back of the patrol car, using the time to observe and memorize details. The officers in the front seat talked as if she wasn't there. Chief's gonna be happy about this one, the driver said, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Been watching her for days, the second officer nodded. Someone matching her description was asking too many questions at City Hall last week. Reynolds said to keep an eye out. Tanya filed away the name. Reynolds, likely referring to Deputy Chief Reynolds, who she'd flagged in her preliminary investigation as having unexplained income. This confirmed her suspicion that her arrest wasn't random. They had been watching her because she was getting close to something. The station was a squat brick building with harsh fluorescent lighting that made everyone look sickly. They led her through a side entrance, away from the front desk and any potential witnesses. No booking photos, no fingerprints, just straight to an interrogation room. Another break in protocol that Tanya carefully noted. The room was small and cold, with a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. A large mirror on one wall obviously concealed an observation room. Tanya's handcuffs were removed, but the door was locked behind her. She was left alone for nearly an hour, a common tactic to increase anxiety and encourage loose lips. When the door finally opened, a new face entered, an older white man in plain clothes with a detective's badge clipped to his belt. He carried a thin file folder and a cup of coffee. "None for her, of course, Ms. Robinson," he said, checking the file. "I'm Detective Wilson. Seems like you've had an eventful evening." Tanya met his gaze steadily. "I was unlawfully stopped. My car was searched without consent, and evidence was planted. So yes, I'd call that eventful." Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly at her direct approach. "Strong accusations. The officers report finding illegal substances in your possession during a routine traffic stop." "There was nothing routine about that stop," Tanya replied. "And nothing in that car belongs to me except my own possessions. I'd like to make my phone call now." "All in good time." Wilson opened the folder. "First, let's talk about why you're really in Pinewood. You've been here for 6 months now? That's a long time for consultant work in a small town." "I go where the clients are," Tanya answered simply. "And these clients, they wouldn't happen to include anyone at the county administration building, where you were parked tonight for several hours. So they had been watching her." Tanya kept her expression neutral. "Am I being charged with parking on a public street?" Wilson leaned forward. "You're being charged with possession of illegal substances, but I'm more interested in why you've been photographing government officials after hours." "I haven't been doing any such thing," Tanya lied smoothly. "And I'd like to speak to an attorney now." Wilson ignored her request. Another violation of procedure. "Here's what I think. I think you're not who you say you are. I think you're working for someone who wants to cause trouble for the good people running this town." Tanya remained silent, studying him. Wilson was fishing, trying to get her to reveal who she worked for. He seemed genuinely unaware of her FBI credentials, which meant this wasn't about catching a federal agent. This was about protecting whatever scheme she'd been investigating. "Nothing to say?" Wilson closed the folder. "That's fine. We have enough to hold you for 48 hours while we process the evidence. Maybe you'll be more talkative after a night in. Our accommodations." As he stood to leave, Tanya spoke up. "Detective Wilson, I should warn you that continuing to deny me my phone call and legal representation will have serious consequences." He paused at the door. "Is that a threat, Ms. Robinson?" "Just a statement of fact," she replied calmly. After Wilson left, Tanya was led to a holding cell. It was small, with a metal bench attached to the wall and a toilet in the corner with no privacy screen. The message was clear. Humiliation and discomfort were part of the experience. The cell was empty except for her, though she could hear other detainees further down the corridor. Male voices, some drunk, some angry. The night shift officer sat at a desk near the cells, occasionally glancing her way. Tanya sat on the bench, back straight, face composed. She had been in worse situations during her 10 years with the Bureau. This was unpleasant but manageable. Most importantly, it was revealing. In just a few hours, she'd gathered more confirmation of corruption than in months of conventional investigation. Hours passed. No phone call, no processing, no booking, just isolation and disregard for procedure. Tanya closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to review what she'd learned. The officers who'd arrested her had mentioned Reynolds and seemed to be acting on orders. They knew she'd been watching the administration building. And most telling, Detective Wilson seemed concerned about who she might be working for rather than about any supposed drug offense. Around 3 a.m., the cell door opened. A different officer, a younger white woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, stood in the doorway. "Time for processing," she said curtly. Tanya was led to a small room where her fingerprints were finally taken. The officer seemed uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. "Is this standard procedure in Pinewood?" Tanya asked casually. "Holding someone for hours before processing?" The officer glanced at the door. "Just following orders." "Whose orders?" Tanya pressed. The woman hesitated. "Look, I don't know what's going on. They just told me to process you now and keep it quiet." "Interesting. Not everyone in the department was part of whatever was happening." "Officer." Tanya glanced at her nameplate. "Officer Chen. I haven't been read my rights. I haven't been allowed a phone call, and evidence was planted in my car. Do you want to be associated with that kind of police work?" Chen's eyes darted to the door again. "I can't help you, but—" She lowered her voice. "The cameras in this room are down for maintenance. If you need to use the bathroom, there's a phone in there. It's for staff, but it works for local calls." She turned away quickly, but Tanya had seen the conflict in her eyes. Not everyone was corrupt, just scared or complicit through silence. "I do need to use the restroom," Tanya said. Chen nodded and led her to a small bathroom. 2 minutes, she said loudly, then whispered, "Make it count," before closing the door. Tanya moved quickly to the phone mounted on the wall. She dialed a memorized number. Not her FBI supervisor, which might be traceable back to the bureau, but a secure line to a trusted contact who would relay her situation. When the call connected, she spoke rapidly in a low voice. "Nightingale, compromised. Pinewood Station, held without process. Plant evidence, targeting surveillance. Reynolds involved. 48-hour window." The person on the other end replied simply, "Confirmed. Hold position." That was all she needed. Confirmation that help would come, but not immediately. The Bureau would need time to respond without blowing her cover or the larger investigation. She'd need to stay in character as Tanya Robinson, consultant, for at least another day. She flushed the toilet and washed her hands before knocking on the door. Officer Chen looked relieved to see her ready to go. Back in the processing room, Chen finished taking her fingerprints and a booking photo. "You'll see a judge for arraignment tomorrow afternoon," she said, avoiding Tanya's eyes. "Or I guess today, actually." "And my phone call?" Tanya asked. Chen bit her lip. "Detective Wilson left instructions that you're to be held incommunicado until further notice. Some Homeland Security exception or something." She clearly didn't believe it herself. "That's not a real thing for a local drug charge," Tanya pointed. "Out." "I know," Chen admitted quietly. "Something's not right about this, but I can't—" The door opened and another officer appeared. "Everything good here?" Chen straightened up. "Just finishing booking, sir." "Good. Back to the cell for this one. Detective Wilson wants to talk to her again in the morning." As Tanya was led back to her cell, she caught Officer Chen watching her with a troubled expression. Another potential witness for when this all blew open. The rest of the night passed slowly. Tanya alternated between dozing lightly and reviewing what she knew. By dawn, she had mentally outlined her next steps. She would continue playing the role of an indignant but increasingly frightened civilian. She would give Wilson just enough to make him think she was breaking. And most importantly, she would gather every scrap of evidence of procedural violations. Morning brought a shift change and a tray of unappetizing food. Tanya ate it anyway, needing to keep her strength up. Around 9, the door opened again, and Detective Wilson appeared with another man, older, gray-haired, wearing an expensive suit. "Ms. Robinson," Wilson said, "this is District Attorney Harmon. He'd like to discuss your situation." The DA studied her with cold eyes. "Detective Wilson tells me you've been uncooperative." "I've been denied my constitutional rights," Tanya corrected. "Him." "Including legal representation." Harmon waved a dismissive hand. Let's not be dramatic. You're facing serious charges. How those charges proceed depends largely on your willingness to answer some simple questions. This was even better than Tanya had hoped. The district attorney himself involved in what should have been a routine drug case. The corruption went higher than she'd initially suspected. "What questions?" she asked, letting a note of uncertainty enter her voice for the first time. Harmon seemed pleased by the change in her demeanor. "Who are you working for, and what exactly were you looking for at the county administration building?" Tanya looked down as if considering how to respond. "I told you I'm a consultant. I work for myself." "Ms. Robinson." Harmon's voice hardened. "We know that's not true. We've checked your background. Your consulting business was only established 6 months ago, right before you arrived here. You have no clients except the ones in Pinewood, and those relationships are suspiciously vague." He leaned against the cell bars. "So I'll ask again. Who sent you to investigate Pinewood County officials?" Tanya looked up, letting genuine anger show through. "No one sent me. But after the way I've been treated, I'm starting to think someone should investigate this place." Wilson stepped forward. "The DA is offering you a deal. Tell us who you're working for, and the drug charges disappear." "And if I don't?" Tanya asked. Harmon smiled thinly. "Then you face the full charges, with enhancements, for operating near a school zone. That's a minimum of 5 years. A lot can happen to someone in PR. Ison. Especially someone who's made enemies in law enforcement." The threat was clear. Tanya let her eyes widen slightly as if truly afraid for the first time. "I need time to think," she said finally. Harmon nodded, satisfied. "Your arraignment is at 2 this afternoon. Think quickly, Ms. Robinson." After they left, Tanya allowed herself a small smile. Everything was falling into place. The arraignment would be her moment, when the truth would finally come out. Until then, she would continue gathering evidence, observing reactions, and building her case against the corruption that had clearly infected every level of Pinewood's justice system. The clock on the wall outside her cell showed 10:15 a.m. Less than 4 hours until the real show began. Tanya settled back on the hard bench, closed her eyes, and waited. Patience had always been one of her strongest skills. Special Agent David Chen stared at his computer screen, checking the time again. 8:15 a.m. Tanya should have checked in hours ago. In 6 months of undercover work, she had never missed a scheduled report. Something was wrong. He picked up his secure phone and dialed her emergency backup number. No answer. Next, he tried the secure messaging system they'd established. No response there either. David ran a hand through his short black hair, the first tendrils of worry taking root. Protocol dictated that he wait 12 hours before initiating emergency procedures for a missing agent. But this wasn't just any agent. This was Tanya Robinson, one of the Bureau's best. More importantly, she was his friend and former partner. They'd worked together for 5 years before she volunteered for this deep cover assignment. David swiveled in his chair to face his supervisor's office. Through the glass walls, he could see Assistant Director Patricia Winters on the phone, her expression serious as usual. He debated whether to bring this to her attention now or wait. Winters was a by-the-book leader who rarely made exceptions to protocol. His instincts won out. David stood up and walked to her door, knocking lightly. Winters looked up and held up, one finger signaling him to wait. After another minute of conversation, she hung up and waved him in. "What is it, Chen?" she asked, already turning to her computer. "It's about Agent Robinson," David said, closing the door behind him. "She missed her scheduled check-in last night. No response on any of her backup channels." Winters looked up sharply. "When was the last contact?" "Yesterday at 7:43 p.m. She was setting up surveillance on the county administration building," said. She had photographic evidence of the deputy mayor meeting with contractors after hours. Winters frowned. "That's not enough to break protocol. We wait the full 12 hours. With respect, ma'am, Robinson has never missed a check-in, and her last report indicated she was getting close to something big. If she's been made, Winters interrupted. then rushing and half-cocked could endanger her further. Follow protocol, Agent Chen. David pressed his lips together. Yes, ma'am. As he turned to leave, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen and froze. It was a message from one of Tanya's emergency contacts, a local attorney in Pinewood, who had been briefed on her real identity in case of emergency. Ma'am, he said, turning back. I just received a message from Tanya's local contact. The message reads, Nightingale compromised. Pinewood Station held without process. Plant evidence. Targeting surveillance. Reynolds involved. 48-hour window. Winters stood up immediately. When did this come in? Just now. The timestamp on. The original message is 3:14 a.m. Winters reached for her phone. This changes things. Nightingale is Robinson's call sign. She's been arrested and is being held at the local police station. If they've planted evidence, they're trying to frame her. David felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The 48-hour window means she thinks they'll hold her that long without charges. That gives us time to respond, but she's in danger every minute she's in their custody, Winters finished, especially if they don't know she's federal. She dialed a number on her phone. This is Assistant Director Winters. I need a team assembled for a possible agent extraction in Pinewood County. Priority level Alpha. She hung up and looked at David. We move carefully. Robinson gave us the 48-hour window for a reason. She doesn't want us to blow her cover or the larger investigation unless absolutely necessary. David nodded, relief washing over him. What's the plan? First, we confirm her status without alerting Pinewood authorities that we're on to them. I want you to drive down there, not as FBI but as a concerned friend. Use your cover identity. See if you can locate her and assess the situation. And if she's in immediate danger? Winter's expression hardened. Then protocol goes out the window. But let's not assume the worst yet. Robinson is resourceful. Within an hour, David was on the road to Pinewood, driving an unmarked car and dressed in civilian clothes. His FBI credentials were hidden in a secret compartment, along with his service weapon. As far as anyone in Pinewood would know, he was just David Chen, insurance adjuster and old friend of Tanya Robinson. The drive gave him time to think through what might have happened. Tanya had been investigating corruption in Pinewood County for months, focusing on suspicious government contracts and possible kickbacks involving the mayor's office. If she'd been arrested while conducting surveillance, it meant someone had identified her as a threat. But did they know she was FBI? Or did they just think she was a nosy outsider? Either way, planting evidence was a serious escalation. It meant they were willing to frame an innocent person to protect their scheme, which meant Tanya could be in real danger. 2 hours later, David pulled into Pinewood, a town that looked like countless others across America. A main street with fading storefronts, a county courthouse, and newer developments spreading along the highway. He drove past the police station first, noting the number of patrol cars in the lot and the general activity level. Nothing seemed unusual from the outside. His next stop was the county courthouse, where he could check the day's arraignment schedule without raising suspicion. If Tanya had been arrested the night before, she would likely be arraigned today. Inside the courthouse, David approached the clerk's desk with a friendly smile. Good morning. I'm trying to find information about today's arraignments. A friend of mine might have gotten into some trouble last night. The clerk, an older woman with kind eyes, looked sympathetic. Name? Tanya Robinson. The woman typed the name into her computer and nodded. Yes, she's on the docket for 2 p.m. today. Judge Hartman's courtroom. Do you know what the charges are? David asked, maintaining his concerned friend demeanor. The clerk checked her screen again. Possession of a controlled substance, Class B felony. She looked up at him with raised eyebrows. Your friend's in serious trouble. David let his face fall. There must be some mistake. Tanya doesn't do drugs. The clerk shrugged. That's for the judge to decide. If you want to be there for her arraignment, it's open to the public. Courtroom 3, second floor. Thank you, David said, turning away. As he walked out of the courthouse, he sent a secure text to Winters. Confirmed. Arraignment 2 p.m. today. Drug charges. Now he needed more information about what had happened. His next stop was the local diner on Main Street where locals gathered, and gossip flowed freely. Taking a seat at the counter, he ordered coffee and breakfast, listening to the conversations around him. It didn't take long. Two men in work uniforms sat a few stools down talking in low voices. "Heard they finally caught that woman who's been snooping around," one said. "Reynolds has been watching her for weeks." The second man nodded. "About time. Outsiders coming. In here asking questions, and nothing good comes from that." David kept his eyes on his plate but his ears tuned to their conversation. "Thompson and Burke made the arrest," the first man continued. "Found drugs in her car." The second man snorted. "Convenient." The first man glanced around and lowered his voice further. "Keep that kind of talk to yourself. You know how things work around here." David finished his meal and left a generous tip. So officers Thompson and Burke had made the arrest, and Deputy Chief Reynolds was involved somehow. The mention of drugs, being convenient, suggested at least some locals were aware of questionable police practices. His phone buzzed with a message from Winters. "Team assembled. Ite 5 p.m. Gather all possible intel before arraignment." David had a few hours before the arraignment. He decided to use the time to learn more about the officers involved. A quick search on his phone showed that Officer James Thompson had been with the Pinewood Police Department for 8 years, while Officer Michael Burke was a 5-year veteran. Both had multiple complaints filed against them for excessive force and racial profiling, but none had resulted in disciplinary action. Deputy Chief William Reynolds was more interesting. He'd risen quickly through the ranks, becoming deputy chief just 3 years after joining the force. His salary as a police officer didn't explain the lakefront property he'd purchased last year, or the boat docked behind it. David drove past Thompson's house, noting the new SUV in the driveway, then past Burke's apartment complex, where the officer was washing a motorcycle that looked well beyond a cop's typical budget. The pattern was becoming clear. These officers were living beyond their means. By 1:30 p.m., David was seated in courtroom 3, watching as other arraignments proceeded. Judge I. Hartman, a stern-looking man in his 60s, handed out bail decisions with mechanical efficiency, rarely looking up from his papers. At precisely 2 p.m., the bailiff called out, "State versus Tanya Robinson." The side door opened and 2 officers led Tanya into the courtroom. David's chest tightened at the sight of his friend in handcuffs wearing the orange jumpsuit of the county jail. But her expression revealed nothing as she stood before the judge. "Ms. Robinson," Judge Hartman intoned, "you are charged with possession of a controlled substance, with intent to distribute, a Class B felony. How do you plead?" Before Tanya could answer, the courtroom doors burst open. David turned to see a tall black woman in an expensive suit striding down the aisle, followed by 2 men in dark suits. "Your Honor," the woman called out, "I am attorney Lisa Washington from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. I move for an immediate dismissal of all charges against Ms. Robinson and her immediate release." A murmur ran through the courtroom. The district attorney, who had been sitting quietly at the prosecution table, jumped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The Justice Department has no jurisdiction here." Attorney Washington approached, the bench removing a folder from her briefcase. "On the contrary, Your Honor, Ms. Robinson was unlawfully detained while conducting an official investigation. Furthermore, we have reason to believe evidence was planted and her constitutional rights were violated." Judge Hartman frowned, taking the folder. "What official investigation?" Washington glanced at Tanya, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Your Honor," Washington said, "Tanya Robinson is a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working undercover to investigate corruption in Pinewood County government and law enforcement." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. David watched as the color drained from the district attorney's face. Tanya remained impassive, though David could see the slight quirk at the corner of her mouth, satisfaction at seeing the plan unfold. Judge Hartman banged his gavel. "Order! I want to see counsel in my chambers immediately. Officer, remove the defendant's restraints." As the bailiff unlocked Tanya's handcuffs, David caught her eye across the courtroom. She gave him the briefest of nods, acknowledging his presence, while maintaining her professional demeanor. The judge, the DA, and Attorney Washington disappeared into chambers. The courtroom buzzed with excitement. David noticed several officers huddled near the door, including one who matched Deputy Chief Reynolds's photo. Their expressions ranged from shock to fear to anger. 20 minutes later, the judge returned, followed by the attorneys. His face was grave as he took his seat. In light of the information presented in chambers, all charges against Tanya Robinson are dismissed with prejudice. Agent Robinson, you are free to go. The district attorney looked like he'd swallowed something, bitter. Reynolds and the other officers had already disappeared from the courtroom. As Tanya was escorted to a side room to change out of her jail attire, David slipped out of the courtroom and sent a message to Winters. Cover blown. Robinson. Released. Justice Department involved. Local authorities in disarray. The response came quickly. Team still incoming. Secure Robinson and prepare for full operation. Outside the courthouse, David waited by his car. When Tanya finally emerged, she was flanked by Attorney Washington and her associates. David approached, slowly, maintaining their cover. Tanya, he called. Are you okay? She turned, her professional mask slipping slightly as she saw him. David, I should have known you'd be here. They embraced briefly, the gesture of old friends rather than federal. Agents, we need to talk, she whispered in his ear. Not here. Washington stepped forward. We've arranged secure transportation for Agent Robinson. And you are? David Chen, he replied, showing his bureau ID discreetly. Assistant Director Winters sent me ahead of the team. Washington nodded. Good. We'll all meet at the federal building in Capital City. 1 hour. As they walked to the waiting cars, David noticed local news vans already pulling up to the courthouse. The story was breaking. What happened? He asked Tanya quietly. Her eyes scanned the area before she answered. They were onto me. Someone spotted me during surveillance and reported back. They set up the stop, planted evidence. She shook her head. But they made mistakes. Lots of them. And now we have everything we need to blow this wide open. David. Open the car door for her. The team will be here soon. Winters is taking this very seriously. Tanya smiled for the first time. Good. Because what I found goes way beyond what we initially suspected. This isn't just about contract kickbacks anymore. The corruption here runs through the entire system. Police, prosecutors, judges. Her expression hardened. And they've been doing this to innocent people for years. As they drove away from the courthouse, David noticed patrol cars scrambling in all directions. The hornet's nest had been kicked, and the insects were in panic mode. They won't get far, Tanya said, following his gaze. I've documented everything, every procedural violation, every threat, every moment they held me without charges. And I wasn't the only one they've done this to. David glanced at her. You think there are other victims? I know there are. And we're going to find them all. Tanya leaned back in her seat, the weariness of her ordeal finally showing. But first, I need a shower and about 12 hours of sleep. David laughed. Knowing Winters, you'll get neither. Until you've been fully debriefed. Tanya sighed. Some things never change. Then her expression grew serious again. David, what they're doing here, it's not just corruption. It's systemic abuse of power. They're destroying lives to protect their scheme, and now they're going to pay for it, David assured her. As they drove toward the federal building where the full FBI team would assemble, Tanya looked out the window at the town that had held her captive. Yes, she said quietly. They certainly are. The courthouse fell silent as Tanya Robinson walked through the double doors of courtroom 3. Gone was the orange jumpsuit from county lockup. Instead, she wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, her FBI badge gleaming on her belt. The transformation was striking, from defendant to federal agent in less than 24 hours. District Attorney Harmon was mid-sentence at the prosecution table when he spotted her. The color drained from his face as she approached, flanked by 2 senior FBI agents and attorney Lisa Washington from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Judge Hartman, who had been listening to Harmon's argument about another case, looked up with irritation at the interruption. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, though his voice lacked conviction. Word had spread quickly through the courthouse after yesterday's dramatic revelation. Attorney Washington stepped forward. "Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but we have an urgent matter that requires the court's immediate attention." Harmony found his voice. "Your Honor, we are in the middle of proceedings. Whatever this is can wait for—" "It cannot wait," Washington interrupted firmly. "Special Agent Tanya Robinson was unlawfully detained and framed by members of the Pinewood Police Department while conducting a federal investigation. We're here to present evidence of widespread civil rights violations and corruption involving the police department, members of county government, and possibly this very court." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Hartman's face tightened. "These are serious allegations, Counselor." "Yes, they are," Washington agreed, "and we have the evidence to support them." The judge looked around the now packed courtroom. Local reporters lined the back wall. Several uniformed officers stood nervously near the door. Deputy Chief Reynolds was conspicuously absent. "Clear the court of all current cases," Judge Hartman ordered the bailiff. "We'll address this matter immediately." As the bailiff ushered out the confused defendants and attorneys from other cases, Tanya took a seat at the table opposite Harmon. The district attorney leaned toward his assistant, whispering urgently. Once the courtroom had been cleared of all other business, Judge Hartman looked down at Tanya. "Agent Robinson, I believe we owe you an apology for your treatment." "Your Honor," Harmon interjected, "while the arrest may have been unfortunate, the officers involved had no way of knowing Ms. Robinson's true identity." Tanya smiled thinly. "That's precisely the point, Mr. Harmon. They didn't know I was FBI, which means they treated me the way they've been treating ordinary citizens of this county, particularly black citizens, for years." She opened a folder on the table. "I've been in Pinewood for 6 months investigating corruption in government contracting. What I didn't expect to find was a systematic pattern of civil rights abuses by local law enforcement, backed by the prosecutor's office and enabled by the court." Judge Hartman shifted uncomfortably. "These are very broad accusations, Agent Robinson. And I have very specific evidence," Tanya replied. She nodded to one of the FBI agents, who approached the bench with a thick binder. "This contains detailed documentation of procedural violations during my arrest and detention, including planted evidence, denial of phone calls and legal representation, and coercive interrogation techniques." The judge took the binder but didn't open it. "Is there more?" "Much more," Attorney Washington confirmed. "While Agent Robinson was being held, her team initiated a review of arrest records for the past 5 years. We found a disturbing pattern of pretextual stops and searches targeting Black and Latino drivers, with drug charges that followed a suspiciously similar pattern to Agent Robinson's case." Harmon stood up, his face flushed. "This is outrageous. You can't come in here and accuse an entire department based on one incident." "It wasn't just one incident," Tanya countered. "My unlawful arrest was simply the most recent in a pattern. And unlike previous victims, I was taking notes." She turned to face the courtroom, addressing the reporters in the back. "During my detention, Officers Thompson and Burke openly discussed watching me for days on orders from Deputy Chief Reynolds. Detective Wilson denied me my constitutional rights while attempting to coerce information about my investigation. And District Attorney Harmon himself visited my cell to threaten me with enhanced charges if I didn't reveal who I was working for." All eyes turned to Harmon, who had gone pale again. "That's a lie," he sputtered. "I never—" "It's all on record," Tanya interrupted, "including your threat that a lot can happen to someone in prison, especially someone who's made enemies in law enforcement. That's witness intimidation, Mr. Harmon." Judge Hartman cleared his throat. "Agent Robinson, what exactly are you alleging here?" Tanya turned back to the judge. "We're alleging a criminal conspiracy involving members of the Pinewood Police Department, the district attorney's office, and several county officials. This conspiracy has 2 components. First, corruption in government contracting, with kickbacks flowing to officials who steer contracts to certain businesses. Second, a pattern of civil rights violations aimed at silencing anyone who asks too many questions or doesn't fit in Pinewood. Washington stepped forward again. Your Honor, the Justice Department is opening a formal investigation into these matters. We're requesting immediate preservation of all relevant records, including arrest reports, body camera footage, phone records, and financial transactions. The judge looked stunned. You're investigating my court? We're investigating the entire system, Washington clarified, including how cases like these have been adjudicated. A commotion at the back of the courtroom drew everyone's attention. Deputy Chief Reynolds had arrived along with several plainclothes officers. Their expressions darkened as they took in the scene. Tanya locked eyes with Reynolds across the room. His face contorted with anger as he realized what was happening. DJ? Second FBI agent moved toward Reynolds, holding up a document. William Reynolds, I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of conspiracy against rights, deprivation of rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. Reynolds backed toward the door. This is a joke. You can't. We can, and we are, the agent replied calmly. Please place your hands behind your back. For a moment it seemed Reynolds might resist. His hand twitched toward his hip where his service weapon would normally be. But seeing the reporters and the crowded courtroom, he thought better of it. The other officers with him looked uncertain, their eyes darting between Reynolds and the exit. As the FBI agent handcuffed Reynolds, Tanya turned back to the judge. Your Honor, this is just the beginning. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of at least 12 cases where innocent people were framed using planted evidence. 3 of those individuals are still incarcerated. Judge Hartman's face had gone ashen. Are you saying I've sentenced innocent people based on fabricated evidence? That's exactly what we're saying, Washington confirmed. And we'll be reviewing every one of those cases. Harmon suddenly stood up. I need to consult with counsel before this goes any further. That would be wise, Washington agreed. Because the next warrants are for Officers Thompson and Burke, Detective Wilson, and you, Mr. Harmon. A shocked silence fell over the courtroom. Even the reporters, who had been scribbling furiously, paused at this revelation. Tanya watched Harmon's face as the reality of his situation sank in. The district attorney looked around desperately as if seeking an escape route. This isn't just about my case, Tanya said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is about justice for every person who has been targeted, harassed, and framed by corrupt officials in this county. It's about the abuse of power that has gone unchecked for too long. At that moment, the courtroom doors opened again. Officer Lisa Chen, the young officer who had helped Tanya make her emergency call from the station bathroom, entered hesitantly. Behind her stood 3 other officers, looking nervous but determined. Agent Robinson, Chen called out. We have information that might help your investigation. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Harmon slumped back into his chair, defeat written across his face. Tanya nodded to Chen. We'll take your statements outside. As Chen and the other officers approached, Reynolds, now in handcuffs, glared at them. Traitors, he hissed. Chen stood taller. No, sir, we're police officers. We took an oath to uphold the law, not break it. Judge Hartman banged his gavel. Order. This court will recess while I review these materials. Agent Robinson, I expect a full briefing on this investigation. Of course, Your Honor, Tanya replied. But first, I'd like to address the matter of those wrongfully imprisoned based on fabricated evidence. 3 people are sitting in jail cells right now because of this corruption. The judge nodded slowly. File the appropriate motions, and I'll review them immediately. As the courtroom began to clear, reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Tanya held up a hand for silence. The FBI and Department of Justice will be holding a press conference this afternoon. Until then, I can only say that we are committed to uncovering the full extent of the corruption in Pinewood County and ensuring that justice is served for all victims. Outside the courtroom, Chen approached Tanya nervously. I should have done more, she said quietly. I knew things weren't right, but I was afraid. Tanya placed a hand on the young officer's shoulder. You did do something. You gave me that phone call when you didn't have to. That took courage. Chen nodded, but still looked troubled. There's more you should know. The body cams, they have footage of everything. Thompson and Burke talking about planting evidence, Reynolds giving orders. They thought the footage was automatically deleted after 48 hours, but I've been backing it up. I couldn't stop them, but I could keep a record. Tanya exchanged glances. With her FBI colleagues, this was even better than they'd hoped. Officer Chen, that evidence could be crucial. Are you willing to testify about what you've seen and heard? All of us are, Chen replied, gesturing to the other officers with her. We joined the force to protect people, not to be part of whatever this is. One of the other officers, AI, middle-aged man with a weathered face, stepped forward. I've been on the force for 15 years. It wasn't always like this. It started small, looking the other way on certain traffic stops, giving breaks to the right people. Then Reynolds came up through the ranks and things changed. How many others on the force feel the way you do? Tanya asked. About half, Chen estimated. Most are just scared. Reynolds has connections. Cross him, and suddenly you're working the worst shifts, or your promotion disappears, or worse. Tanya nodded. That ends today. We'll need statements from all of you, and you'll be protected as federal witnesses. As the officers were led away to give their statements, Washington approached Tanya. This is bigger than we thought. If half the department is willing to talk, then we're looking at a complete overhaul, Tanya finished. And not just the police. The corruption extends to the county government, the prosecutor's office, maybe even the court. It's going to be a long process, Washington warned. Tanya watched as Reynolds was led out in handcuffs, reporters trailing behind him. It took a long time for things to get this bad. It will take time to fix it. But at least now the truth is coming out. Her phone buzzed with a message from Assistant Director Winters. Well done, Robinson. Operation approved for expansion. Full resources authorized. Tanya smiled. Phase 1 was complete. Her cover was blown, but the larger investigation was just beginning. What had started as a probe into corrupt contracts had uncovered a systemic abuse of power that had harmed countless lives. Now, finally, the victims would have a voice, and those responsible would face justice. As she walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight, cameras flashed and reporters called her name. But Tanya's thoughts were on the people she'd never met, the ones who'd been stopped on pretextual grounds, had evidence planted in their cars, been pressured into false confessions, and sent to prison for crimes they didn't commit. People who hadn't had an FBI badge to protect them. This is for them, she thought as she prepared to face the press. The truth was finally coming to light, and Pinewood County would never be the same. 3 months had passed since the day Tanya Robinson revealed her true identity in the Pinewood County Courthouse. The small town had changed dramatically in that time. News vans had come and gone. Federal agents had become a common sight, and the power structure that had ruled Pinewood for years had crumbled like a house of cards. Tanya stood at the back of the community center, watching as people filed in for the town hall meeting. Many faces were familiar to her now, not just the officials she'd investigated, but ordinary citizens who had been affected by the corruption. Some nodded in recognition as they passed her. Others still regarded her with suspicion, unsure what to make of the FBI agent who had lived among them under false pretenses for months. David Chen joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. Big turnout, he observed. People want answers, Tanya replied, and they deserve them. The investigation had expanded far beyond what either of them had initially expected. What began as a probe into government contracting had revealed a web of corruption that touched nearly every aspect of local government. Deputy Chief Reynolds hadn't acted alone. Mayor Wilson, 3 county commissioners, and several prominent business owners had all been implicated in the scheme. But the most disturbing revelations had been about the justice system itself. District Attorney Harmon had been charged with multiple counts of evidence tampering and witness intimidation. Judge Hartman had resigned rather than face an ethics investigation, and the police department had been placed under federal oversight after evidence emerged of widespread civil rights violations. "Are you ready for this?" David asked, nodding toward the podium at the front of the room. Tanya took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." As they made their way to the front, she noticed Lisa Chen sitting in the second row. The young officer had become a key witness, providing crucial evidence of police misconduct. Her decision to come forward had inspired others, creating a cascade of testimony that had broken the case wide open. Attorney Lisa Washington from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division stood at the podium, calling the meeting to order. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Tonight is about transparency and accountability. For too long, this community has been kept in the dark about how its institutions have been corrupted. That ends now." The room fell silent as Washington introduced the panel, Tanya and David representing the FBI, a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the interim police chief who had been brought in from outside to reform the department. When it was Tanya's turn to speak, she approached the podium with measured steps. Looking out at the sea of faces, some angry, some hopeful, all attentive, she felt the weight of responsibility. 6 months ago, I came to Pinewood as Tanya Robinson, business consultant. My real mission was to investigate allegations of corruption in government contracting. What I found was much more troubling. A system that wasn't just financially corrupt but morally bankrupt. She paused, making eye contact with various members of the audience. During my investigation, I documented numerous instances of officials steering contracts to businesses owned by friends and family in exchange for kickbacks. Those kickbacks funded lavish lifestyles well beyond what public servant salaries could support. But money was only part of the story. Tanya gestured to a screen behind her, where photos of Deputy Chief Reynolds and his associates appeared. These officials used the police department as their enforcement arm. Anyone who asked too many questions or threatened to expose the scheme became a target. And their methods were both sophisticated and disturbing. The screen changed to show arrest statistics broken down by race and outcome. Over the past 5 years, Black and Latino drivers in Pinewood were 7 times more likely to be searched during traffic stops than white drivers. Those searches resulted in drug charges at a rate far exceeding state and national averages. At first glance, this might suggest a serious drug problem in certain communities. Tanya clicked to the next slide, showing a timeline of arrests. But a closer examination revealed something else entirely. The majority of these arrests followed a pattern: a pretextual stop, a search conducted without proper consent, and the discovery of drugs in locations that were often suspiciously similar from case to case. Murmurs spread through the audience as people began to connect the dots. When I was arrested using these same tactics, I was able to document exactly how the process worked. Officers Thompson and Burke stopped me without cause, searched my vehicle without consent, and planted evidence. They then denied me my constitutional rights to a phone call and legal representation. The room had gone completely silent now. What they didn't know was that I was taking mental notes of every violation, every procedural error, every hint about who was giving the orders. And when they brought District Attorney Harmon to threaten me with enhanced charges if I didn't reveal who I was working for, they sealed their own fate. Tanya clicked to a new slide showing a map of Pinewood with dozens of pins representing incidents. My case wasn't unique. We've identified at least 47 similar cases over the past 5 years where individuals were framed using planted evidence. 23 of those people went to prison. Thanks to the Justice Department's review, 17 have already been released, with the remaining cases under expedited review. A woman in the front row wiped tears from her eyes. Her son had been one of the first to be released after 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. The question many of you are asking is, how could this happen? How could so many people be involved in such a widespread abuse of power? Tanya stepped away from the podium, moving closer to the audience. It happened. Gradually. It happened because good people stayed silent out of fear. It happened because those with power convinced themselves that cutting corners was justified if it kept the right people in charge. And it happened because the system was designed to protect itself rather than the citizens it was meant to serve. She gestured to Chen and the other officers who had come forward. But even in the darkest systems, there are people who remember their oath to serve and protect. Officer Chen and her colleagues risked their careers and more to expose the truth. Their courage made this reckoning possible. David took over at this point, explaining the changes that were being implemented. The police department was under a consent decree that mandated comprehensive reforms, from new use of force policies to community oversight boards. All officers were now required to undergo implicit bias training, and body cameras were mandatory for all interactions with the public. The interim chief spoke about rebuilding trust, acknowledging that it would take years to repair the damage that had been done. When the formal presentations ended, the floor opened for questions. They came rapid fire, reflecting the community's anger, confusion, and cautious hope. "What happens to the money?" one resident asked. "All those kickbacks and bribes?" The prosecutor explained that assets traced to illegal activities were being seized, with a portion set aside for restitution to victims. "What about the judges who signed off on these warrants?" another person demanded. Tanya stepped forward again. "The judicial misconduct investigation is ongoing. 2 judges have already resigned and others are under review. The Justice Department is examining every case that passed through this courthouse over the past 5 years. An older man stood up, his voice shaking with emotion. "My grandson is serving 5 years for drugs found in his car during a traffic stop. How do we know if his case was one of these frame-ups?" Lisa Washington approached the microphone. "Sir, we've established a review process for exactly these situations. There's a hotline and a dedicated legal team. If your grandson's case matches the pattern we've identified, it will be fast-tracked for review." The questions continued for over 2 hours. As the meeting finally wound down, Tanya found herself surrounded by people wanting to share their stories. Some had been directly affected by the corruption. Others had suspected something was wrong but felt powerless to speak up. One woman grasped Tanya's hand tightly. "My brother always said he was set up. No one believed him. He died in prison last year." Tanya met her eyes steadily. "I'm so sorry. We can't bring him back, but we can restore his name. And we can make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Later that evening, Tanya and David sat in a quiet corner of the local diner. The owner, who had initially been suspicious of Tanya during her undercover days, now treated her like a hometown hero, refusing to let them pay for their meal. "It's a start," David said, watching as Chen and several other officers entered the diner. Local residents who once would have tensed at the sight of police now nodded in greeting. "But there's still so much work to do." Tanya sipped her coffee. "The structural changes are important, but the cultural changes will take longer. People don't just forget years of abuse overnight." "Are you having second thoughts about the new assignment?" David asked. After the success of the Pinewood investigation, Assistant Director Winters had offered Tanya a position leading a new task force focused on investigating similar patterns of corruption and civil rights abuses in small jurisdictions across the country. The Pinewood case had revealed a blind spot in federal oversight. Small towns where corrupt officials operated with impunity, assuming they were too insignificant to attract serious attention. "No second thoughts," Tanya replied. "Pinewood isn't unique. There are other towns, other counties where the same patterns exist, they're just waiting for someone to notice." David nodded. "The task force is approved. Winters wants you to pick your team." "I already have some ideas." Tanya glanced at Chen, who was showing something on her phone to her fellow officers. "Starting with some of the good cops we found here. They've seen the playbook from the inside." The next morning, Tanya stood outside the federal courthouse where the trial of Deputy Chief Reynolds was about to begin. Reporters had gathered, hoping for a statement. "Agent Robinson," one called out, "do you think justice is being served in Pinewood?" Tanya considered the question carefully. "Justice isn't a destination, it's a process. What happened in Pinewood, the abuse of power, the violation of rights, the betrayal of public trust, didn't happen overnight. And fixing it won't happen overnight either." She looked up at the courthouse where Reynolds and his co-defendants would soon face a jury of their peers. But for the first time in a long time, the system is working as it should. The guilty are being held accountable. The innocent are being freed. And the community is rebuilding institutions that serve all its citizens equally. Another reporter pushed forward. What's your message to other communities that might be experiencing similar corruption? My message is simple, Tanya replied. The truth always finds a way out. It might take time. It might require courage from unexpected places. But no system of corruption can stand forever when good people decide to speak up. As she walked up the courthouse steps, Tanya thought about all that had happened since that night when two officers had pulled her over on a quiet street. What had begun as a simple investigation into contract fraud had exposed a cancer that had eaten away at the heart of a community. The road to recovery would be long and difficult. Trust, once broken, was not easily restored. But as she took her seat in the courtroom, watching as Reynolds was led in wearing prison orange, the same color she had been forced to wear during her detention, she felt a sense of completion. The tables had turned, the powerful had fallen, and those who had been silenced finally had a voice. The judge called the court to order. In the case of United States versus William Reynolds et al., is the prosecution ready to proceed? The lead prosecutor stood. Yes, Your Honor, the United States is ready. Tanya sat back as the trial began. This was just one case, one town, one corrupt system exposed. But it represented something larger, a recognition that justice delayed was justice denied, and that no one was above the law, no matter how small or insignificant their domain of power might seem. As the prosecutor began his opening statement, detailing the charges against Reynolds and his co-conspirators, Tanya caught the eye of a woman seated across the aisle, the mother of one of the first wrongfully convicted men to be released. The woman nodded slightly, her expression a mixture of grief for what had been lost and determination to see justice done. Tanya nodded back, a silent acknowledgement of both the pain of the past and the promise of a better future. The system had failed this community for years. But today, in this courtroom, it was working exactly as it should. And tomorrow, Tanya and her new task force would move on to the next town, the next corrupt system, carrying the lessons of Pinewood with them. The truth had a way of coming to light, even in the darkest places. And when it did, those who had abused their power would find themselves facing a reckoning they never saw coming.